Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring and mentoring executives, frontline employees, and job seekers for nearly 40 years through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions, big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big job change. We all know transitions can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have actionable strategies and proven tactics to achieve the future you want. We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to your next great job. So if change is on your horizon, you won't want to miss this discussion. Also, please subscribe to this podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. Jeff Ton, thank you so much for joining us today on People in Transition. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Thanks a lot for having me on the show, Bob. I'm looking forward to it as well.
Jeff, I always start these recordings with kind of curiosity of the people that we have on here. And when you were a child, what was it that you thought you wanted to be when you grew up?
That is such a great question. I tell you, when I was a child, I wanted to be a professional baseball player. That was kind of my dream. As I moved into junior high and high school, it switched to, believe it or not, I wanted to be a rock star. I was going to be the next great guitarist and singer-songwriter, and I learned very quickly you had to have talent, and I did not. So those were my dreams.
So, Jeff, what were the transition moments that you went through from that picture of yourself as a child wanting to be a rock star to where you're at today?
I was actually in college, was majoring in music theory and composition because, again, I was 18 years old and still wanted to be that rock star. And that was going to be a path to do that and satisfy my parents to have a college degree. And that was when I made that discovery that in order to do what I wanted to do, you had to have talent. And the university was very, very clear in saying I did not have the talent. So I dropped out of school at that point and really had no idea what I wanted to do with my career. And it wasn't too long after that, the Commodore 64 came out. Now I'm dating myself. The Commodore 64 was one of the first computers for home use. And I bought one kind of on a lark. And Bob, I tell you, I fell in love. I fell in love with the computer, with writing code. I could write software that would make that thing do amazing things. I devoured every college textbook, every magazine I could find on software development, and grew into a programmer after a number of years. Became a programmer. We call them devs now, these days. And that launched my career in technology. And I was in technology, well, I still am in technology, for a little over 40 years, all because I went out and bought that Commodore 64 back in 1977, 1978.
And what got you into the people business?
I got dragged kicking and screaming into management. I had a couple of friends at the time. I was going to be that long-haired hippie COBOL programmer for the rest of my career. I was darn good at it and I enjoyed doing it. And that whole people thing, I just didn't really want to have to mess with that. The politics of management and all that. So I had a couple of friends that really kind of kicked me in the butt, and they kept saying, no, you really need to do this. You'd be good at it. And I finally took their lead and accepted a role as a team lead, as a manager of this group at the company where I was working, and found that I loved working with people and helping them grow, helping them be the best versions of themselves that they could be so that we could all be successful. And I switched from getting my strokes, if you will, from writing code to helping people grow. And that was really a transitionary period for me, probably about 20 years into my career.
Jeff, you talk a lot about the power of a network. What are some of the ways your network has helped your career? And how can our listeners use their network to help them in their job search?
That is such a great question. And it's actually a lesson that I learned at one point in my career when I was laid off from my job. And it was the first time in my life that I didn't have a job and I was looking for my next one. And, everybody said, well, you should reach out to your network. And I'm like, I don't have one. I think I had like 10 connections on LinkedIn at that point. And I was stunned at the time how many people would stop what they were doing to meet for coffee and help. People that I hadn't talked to in 20 years said, yes, Jeff, I'll meet you. People that I didn't even know that I was being introduced to said, yes, Jeff, let's grab coffee. I'll help you. And I promised two things to myself at that point. I promised one is that I would never let my network grow cold again. And two, whenever anybody asked me, my answer was, yes, I'll meet you for coffee. What time and where? What that has shown me throughout these years of building this network is I've got a group of people that no matter what the question is, they are there willing to help. I can send any one of them a note, whether it's email, whether it's a LinkedIn message, whether it's an SMS message on the phone, and they will answer and they will provide input and they will help. It's like having this huge board of advisors, right, that you can reach out to with just about any question that you have. And so you learn from that network. I watch the things that they post on LinkedIn, that they share, and you learn and grow professionally. I can tell you, I would not be here today without having that powerful network. As a job seeker, it's incredibly important. I forget what the most recent statistics are, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 85% of all jobs that have been filled, the candidates that were hired into those roles give 85% of the time attribution to their professional network. Somebody told them about the job, somebody introduced them to somebody that told them about the job, somebody recommended them, whatever it is, 85% of the time, give or take, the network played a role in them getting that job.
And what if I am like how you described, a very limited network right now, and I want to expand it, make it more robust? What are the steps that I should take to accomplish that?
I'd say start. And I know that sounds trite and maybe oversimplification, but if I were in that position that I was 20 years ago where I had this small network, reach out to one of those people. Someone. Reach out to them. And in this day and age, you could do a virtual coffee, or you could meet at a coffee shop, you could meet for lunch. But with every conversation that you have, you ask one specific question, and this is how it grows the network. You ask, Bob, who are 3 people that I should be talking to? Because I want Bob to introduce me to 3 people. I want to leave with names of people that I'm going to talk to. And that's how your network grows. Because now all of a sudden, instead of having 20 people on my network, I have 23. And if I go to lunch with each one of those, I'm going to end up with 9 more. And it just grows exponentially when you ask for introductions. And a lot of people are very, very happy to make those introductions. I tell you right now, for your listeners, Bob, I am a connector. I love connecting with people, but I love more introducing people to each other because you never know where that's going to lead. So to your listeners, reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect with me there, and I am happy to introduce you throughout my network to the people that can help you wherever you are in your career journey.
Jeff, you've written a book, Amplify Your Job Search Strategies for Finding Your Dream Job. What's the story behind the book and what inspired you to write it?
Well, I tell you, what really inspired me to write it was the pandemic. I had this idea percolating around in my head for writing a book about how do you conduct a job search, because frankly, it's not a skill that gets taught. We don't learn that in our college courses. We don't learn that in our MBA programs. We certainly don't learn that in high school, is how do you do. We may learn how to write a resume, but it really stops there. And over the years, I had used my own process. I had talked to thousands of professionals about the process that they were using. And I thought, well, this would be a great book. And I had it on my book list to write as an author, and it was tentatively titled, Let's Do Coffee. Well, the pandemic changed the title, certainly, because at that point when the pandemic hit, you couldn't go meet for coffee. And what I was seeing was all these people that were losing their jobs and they needed help. And so I sat down and cranked it out. And for the first 4 or 5 months of the pandemic, basically all I did was write, because I needed to get that book out. I needed to get it in people's hands. That was the inspiration to actually do it and write the book. And it's a culmination of a framework that I have used successfully 10 or 12 times in my career. Other professionals have used it in their careers as I counsel and coach them. And I used input from my network to help write the book. It's proved valuable to a lot of people who find themselves either in a job transition not of their choosing, or maybe you're already in a role and you're not feeling like it's the right role for you. It can also help you conduct a search when you're still employed elsewhere.
Jeff, in your book, you lay out a framework for finding a dream job. So this is going to be a little bit of a multi-part question. First of all, I'm curious, what's the definition that you have of a dream job? And then what's the framework that you suggest to find it? And then the final part is that should you settle for a job that just isn't your dream job?
I love that last part, Bob. So my definition of a dream job is a job that leverages your strengths, aligns with your values, stokes your passions, and helps you on a step towards your purpose. And to me, that's a dream job. If you find a dream job that does those 4 things, if you find a position that has those 4 elements to it, it will feel like your dream job. Now, a lot of people, when they're thinking about dream job, they think, well, that'll be my last job. A dream job may not always be your dream job. You change, the company changes. So I've probably had 5 or 6 dream jobs in my career. But if you're looking for a way to identify it, it's the position leverages your strengths, aligns with your values, feeds your passions, and helps you on a step towards your purpose. That's the dream job. Now, you asked about the framework. And so the framework that I talk about in the book, really, it starts with you, because you have to identify those 4 elements, right? You have to identify your strengths and your weaknesses. And I'm happy to talk about the weaknesses side of that as well. You have to identify what are your values, what are your passions, and what is your purpose? And when it comes to purpose, a lot of times people think I've got to have this grand purpose of I want to end world hunger. And that's not the kind of purpose that I'm talking about in the framework. The kind of purpose I'm talking about is your why. What gets you up in the morning? Why do you go do what you do? Maybe it's to feed your family. That's an okay purpose to have. Maybe it's something broader than that. But anyway, you have to identify that. So you start with that. And the book talks about how do you begin to do that. And then we go through what are your accomplishments that you've had throughout your career, even if you're in early career stages. What things have you accomplished? Not the things that go on your resume necessarily, but list out your accomplishments. Create a spreadsheet of everything that you've accomplished. Create a spreadsheet of your network. And then a big step in this process is networking, because as I said, about 85% of jobs are filled through the network. And so you're going to spend about 85% of your time during your job search working on your network. Then the unusual piece that kind of raises eyebrows sometimes is when you're doing this search, you're not looking for a job. You're looking for a company. And so it's almost like reverse recruiting. So I encourage people to research companies. So there's a lot of tools that you can do that you can use to identify that. The one that I recommend a lot is a tool called Mergent Intellect, which is a database of millions and millions and millions of companies with a great search engine. And it can help you identify companies that meet some of your criteria without that you may never even heard of, right? So you create this top 10 list of things you're looking for in your next job, things you're looking for in your next boss, things you're looking for in your next company. And you use those 30 items as your search criteria to help identify companies because, oh, by the way, you started with your strengths, your values, your passions, and your purpose. Those companies are going to begin to align with your strengths, your values, your passions, and your purpose. And then as you're searching and you're finding those companies, you're leveraging your network to get introduced into those companies. And then the book wraps up with how do you prepare for a conversation related to the company, whether it's an interview or a pre-interview. How do you prepare for the interview? And how do you evaluate an offer or multiple offers? And so it takes you through each one of those steps. Now, your third part of your question, Bob, was should you ever settle for something that is not your dream job? Yes, I would say there are certain circumstances when you might want to settle. I'd say number one may be how desperately you need a paycheck, because this is a process. It does take time to work through your network and identify your dream job. So you may need to find a job that gives you that paycheck. I would say hopefully it's one that is on your roadmap towards your dream job. And I do talk a little bit about that in the book. And another time when you may want to settle is when you're trying to move into a different industry or a different sector. I tell the story in the book of one of the searches that I was on, and healthcare was one of the areas I wanted to look into. Well, I had no background in healthcare. And so the first person that I talked to was a chief information officer for a hospital system. And she told me, Jeff, there's no way a hospital, for example, is going to hire you to be chief information officer without a background in healthcare. Why don't you look at software companies that serve the healthcare industry and move there first? That gets you into the industry. You start to learn the lingo. You start to have connections. Then take that step towards working directly in healthcare. So had I done that, that would have been a job settling for something less than my dream job to help me get to my dream job.
Jeff, you mentioned identifying your weaknesses. How do you do that, and why would you do that?
Well, there's a great quote, and I think it was Peter Drucker that first said it, but his quote has been misquoted so many daggone times. It gets misquoted as maximize your strengths to make your weaknesses irrelevant. In other words, focus on your strengths and don't worry about your weaknesses. But that's not really what Drucker was saying. If you read the full quote, he was saying that you have to understand your strengths and your weaknesses. You have to understand how you learn. You have to understand what your values are, going back to that again. And so it's a much broader quote. And so as you're looking at and establishing what are your strengths and your weaknesses, I encourage people to take a look at their weaknesses and look at them from the lens of a lot of people I talk to are in technology related fields. And so they get this analogy. Look at it in terms of like you were going to outsource that function. And so is there a weakness on there that you could outsource to someone else? In other words, if you're on a team, someone else may have what you identify as a weakness. They may have it as a strength, and therefore they complement you and make up for that gap in your skill set. Or maybe it's a weakness that it's like, you really can't hand that off to anyone. Here's the example I use from my own career. 25 years ago, I identified as a weakness public speaking. I hated getting up in front of anybody and talking. I wouldn't speak up in a meeting as a very introverted person, because what happens when you talk in a meeting? Every head turns towards you and looks at you. I'd freeze. I'd get sweaty palms. Gosh, if I had a presentation, I'd be up the night before just sick that I had to go do this presentation the next day. But I had goals in my career. I wanted to become a chief information officer, and I knew to achieve that goal, I was going to have to figure out how to get over that. Because if I have this great vision for my department and I hand it off to somebody else to communicate it to my team because I'm scared to do it, then who are they going to follow? They're not going to follow me. They're going to follow that other person because they're the ones that are extolling the vision. So I had to figure out a way to, at the very least, be able to get up in front of groups and present. And so I purposely, when I identified that weakness, I purposely put myself in the position that forced me to get up in front of groups and talk. So that while I may still be nervous when I get up in front of groups, I got over it. And now, ironically enough, 25 years later, I make my living by getting up in front of groups and speaking. And now I'm not suggesting that every weakness that you identify is going to turn into a strength or turn into a career path, but I believe that there's probably some weaknesses there that you need to develop at least to some level of competency in order to get where you're going on your journey. So that's what I encourage people to do as they create their list of weaknesses, they create their list of strengths. They look at those weaknesses and say, I want to focus on one or two of those.
Do you think your resume should describe the scope and scale of your previous jobs?
I think it's difficult in some ways for a resume to tell the whole story. Yes, you want to put your previous job on the resume. You want to talk about the things that you did, but you always have to remember as you're writing the resume to put yourself in the seat of the person that is reading the resume, because they're looking at it. They have a problem that they need to solve. They need to know very, very quickly from your resume, are you the solution to that problem? And so you always have to write your resume about what's in it for them. So you're going to say, these are my accomplishments, but you have to make sure that they are the accomplishments that that organization or even that person cares about. So I'm a big proponent of tailoring your resume. It's not a work of fiction, but you're tailoring your resume to the position that you're applying for, to the company that you're applying for. When you can really fill out the story, that's the interview process. That's the conversation. It may be even during a networking meeting in hopes of getting an interview for a position that you're telling the stories of what you did at ABC Corporation and what you were able to accomplish and how you were able to accomplish it. Those stories are really hard to tell from a resume.
Jeff, let's say that you're getting interviews, so your resume is getting you in the door, but you're not getting offers. What does that say, and should you do about that?
That can be so disheartening. You know, sometimes I hear from people that are sending out hundreds and hundreds of resumes and not hearing back. But it's even harder when you're hearing back and you're getting a foot in the door and you're in those interview processes. And I always coach people, counsel people to really analyze the interviews that you're in. You have to look at it without the guises of self-deception, right? If you walk away from an interview thinking, man, I just nailed this thing, I was great, and you don't end up getting the job, you have to really look at it and say, where did I miss the mark? What did I not bring to the table that perhaps other people brought to the table? It's great if you can get feedback, but companies really shy away from giving feedback. They're so concerned, I think, about lawsuits and getting themselves into trouble that they just don't share any feedback, which is unfortunate because I think that feedback could be really valuable to people to help them grow. The other thing that I suggest to people is think about the question that maybe you didn't handle so well, the question that is just a tough question for you to answer. Maybe it's someone asks you, there was a 6-month gap in your work history. Why? Or maybe you've moved from one job to another, and so it looks like you've been job hopping, and you're really nervous that someone's going to ask that question. I encourage people to think about those questions and then write the answer out longhand. Write the story. An interview is the time to tell the stories. Write the story down that answers that question and then rehearse it. Rehearse it so often that you get it right every time. Rehearse it so often that you cannot get it wrong. Rehearse it so much that it just rolls off your tongue when the person asks that question. You'll feel better about it. They'll understand the story, and you won't hem and haw when they ask that question.
Jeff, do soft skills matter to a hiring manager? And how do you tell that hiring manager about your soft skills that you think are assets for yourself?
I think soft skills are so important. In fact, I've taken to calling them essential skills instead of soft skills. And I think, first of all, you can identify soft skills on your resume, talk about your communication skills, talk about your collaboration skills, whatever you think your strengths are in the soft skill or essential skill category. And then as you're in the interview, part of it will come through in the interview. If you have a talent for communication, if that's a soft skill, an essential skill that you've developed, that will come through. But you can also tell the story about how you identified that as a skill and how you continue to build that skill. It's in those stories that you really convey those soft skills in the interview. You know, again, I mentioned I talked to a lot of technology professionals given my background. And so many times the interview is very focused on the technology skills themselves. And so you have to find a way to work those soft skills in to the interview process. Bring them up. A good interviewer always asks, what questions do you have? That's the time to open that up and ask, well, how important for this role are essential skills like collaboration? Oh, well, they're very important. Boom, there's your opening, right? So you have that opportunity to guide the conversation in the interview.
Jeff, any books or other resources that you would recommend to our listeners?
There are so many great books out there about your job search, about building a network. Of course, I recommend mine, Amplify Your Job Search. But if you're really wanting to focus on building your professional network, there's a great book by an author by the name of Amy Waniger. Amy wrote a book called Network Beyond Bias. And I tell the story in my book of the first time I met Amy. We met at a Starbucks, and she literally had me drawing my professional network on the back of a napkin. And I thought I was the king of networking by this point in my career. And what I learned is I had a lot to learn. And Amy's book really changed my approach to networking. So I would totally recommend that. So that's one of the major resources that I would recommend.
Jeff, if our listeners remember 3 things from our discussion today, what are those 3 things that you want them to take away?
Network. No, I'm kidding. Network is definitely one of them. I would say that one thing to take away from this would be the power of the network. That is how you're going to find your next position, without a doubt, is through your network. And then 2 and 3, I would say that what we were talking about having a process, defining what your process is. Use my process from Amplify Your Job Search. If that works for you, that's great. But if you have a process or you know someone, follow that process. It will help you from getting discouraged because you're taking a step forward every time you execute your process. So network, follow a process. And third, rely on your friends and family for help during this time. If you're in a job transition, it can be emotionally draining. You need to make sure that you're taking care of yourself through this. So rely on other people to help you. Those would be my 3 takeaways, Bob.
Jeff, from the start of our LinkedIn relationship to the times we've talked, I knew that you were going to provide so much great advice, so many real world experiences. I want to thank you so much for your caring and sharing with our audience today. Thanks, Jeff.
My pleasure, Bob. Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you. I've enjoyed our conversations tremendously. And to your listeners, if they have questions, I am happy to connect on LinkedIn and answer whatever I can.
Thank you for listening. We're working in unprecedented times. The purpose of these episodes is to give you the support and critical tools to adjust with the changing marketplace. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully survived their own obstacle course and can share useful information. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on your social media. Your review and rating helps get this to more people. Also, if you have questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode.